Hey everybody, welcome back to the Startup Sense podcast. This is your host, Jonah Lupton. Once again, have a really cool episode for you today. So today's guest is Tom Harari. He is the co-founder of a company called Cleanly. The website is cleanly.com. It's spelled just like it sounds, CLEANLY.com. And essentially what they're providing is laundry services. So it's kind of on-demand laundry. They do, in most cases, get you laundry back to you within 24 hours, although you can rush that up to overnight or even same day with a small rush fee. Company has raised, let's see, about $9 million from investors. They actually launched in early 2015 from Y-Combinator. They launched in New York or in Manhattan. They have since expanded into Brooklyn, and now they're in the DC area. That's Washington, DC, with plans to also come to San Francisco in later this year. I guess that could be early or mid-fall. I guess that pretty much wraps up the intro. As always, if anyone has any feedback on the podcast, feel free to email me at jonahlupton@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from all of you. Now let's welcome Tom to the show. Tom, how are you, man?
I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me, Jonah.
Absolutely, man. So you're calling us from New York today, right?
That's right.
So the company's based in New York. Talk to us about where this idea came from. What is the pain point that you guys are solving here?
Sure. So on the surface, it seems like a relatively simple and straightforward pain point. We all have laundry. It needs to get done. How do you do it? When I moved to New York about 7 years ago to take a position with Omnicom Media Group, large global ad and media buying agency here in New York, I moved to a really cool, funky, hipstery type apartment in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Had a garden in the back, was growing vegetables. Very cool. No washer and dryer. After about 2 weeks of killing myself at work and running out of clean underwear and socks, I started scratching my head and thinking like, okay, so how do we get laundry done? I didn't have any laundry room in my building or anything. It was a very old brownstone walk up. And it turns out tons of other people had the same issue. Someone turned me on to this idea of pickup and delivery, which was very common in New York. It still is. And the light bulb just went off in my head. I said, like, this is the coolest thing ever. I can just call someone, they'll pick up my laundry, and I can just go back to doing things that I actually enjoy doing. In practice, the execution was really poor. A lot of times, the local cleaners will offer pickup and delivery to stay competitive with the needs of consumers, but they're not really in the delivery business. They're not in the logistics business. And it turns out, as I started to kind of dig in a little bit more, once I really started to feel how frustrating and inconvenient it was. A lot of times these mom and pop cleaners are not even in the cleaning business anymore. 2 out of 3 cleaners farm out the work to these larger wholesale vendors. And so they're really not doing much anymore other than just being a storefront middleman. And that kind of explained why things were so broken. I mean, you're talking about really long turnarounds to get your clothes back. They're open during business hours when most of us are working. Many of them don't accept credit cards. You still have to pay in cash. Just the whole thing is really broken. And so I think at the time Uber had just come into New York. I'd heard about Instacart out in San Francisco, and it just made sense that this was going to be a thing. And I kept saying, someone should do this, someone should do this. And finally, I just said, okay, why not me? I teamed up with a good buddy of mine who's now my co-founder and Cleanly's COO. His name is Itai. His background is in operations management. He had worked at Tahari, the global fashion brand here in New York. And we both kind of just sat down and said, okay, if we wanted to attack this space and really build something new that provides a lot of value, what would it look like? And so because we don't come from the dry cleaning industry, my background's in marketing, his background's in operations, we don't have those kind of biases of this is how it's always been done. This is how it's always been done is the worst thing, in my opinion. It's antithetical to innovation. So we start with the consumer, with the customer, saying, okay, what would the perfect solution look like? And let's work backwards from there. And let's just mold this entire industry to work for the customer instead of the other way around.
Very, very smart. I like the approach. So talk to us. I mean, this is a huge logistics play, and you told me a little bit about it in the intro. So maybe walk us through what's involved from when the customer orders the service and then how you guys get it back to them so quickly.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to figure out here. I figured it out. So our entire engineering team is based in Israel. A lot of them had worked on large-scale logistics and supply chain tech solutions during their compulsory military service. So we come to this with a lot of firepower and a lot of know-how from the logistics side of things. And I think what your listeners might be interested in is how the whole operations work. So When you as the customer are placing an order with Cleanly, you're choosing a 1-hour window, which is very aggressive. In New York, I think Fresh Direct, which is a massive company for grocery delivery, can only offer a 2-hour window. So we're guaranteeing a 1-hour window, and you're placing the order by scheduling the 1-hour window for the pickup as well as the drop-off. So we're guaranteeing the turnaround at the time of the order. Now, what happens in practice once you place that order? A Cleanly valet arrives at your door to pick up that bag, and we give all of our customers Cleanly branded garment bags and laundry bags, and a separate bag for hang dry. Once those drivers, those valets, are done with their route of picking up all the different bags, they then take it to a Cleanly fulfillment center. Imagine like a large warehouse where we're intaking all the bags, doing all the quality assurance, itemizing everything. That's how you as the customer get the invoice in your email about a couple hours after the order is picked up. And then we go directly to these large wholesale cleaners who the mom and pops were going to anyway. And these large wholesale cleaners will come to our fulfillment center, take any bags that have been assigned to them. They clean it at their facilities, bring it back, and then those bags are ready for the valets to go out and do their drop-offs. So that entire supply chain has to work smoothly and flawlessly every single time. And as I mentioned to you in the intro before we started, we're now offering same day and overnight turnaround, meaning you place the order, you get it picked up at night. In the morning when you wake up, your bag is ready for you, cleaned, washed, folded, and at your door. So a lot of moving parts and need to work correctly, and I think it's near impossible to do so without technology.
What was the hardest part about setting up that entire logistics system?
Probably just mapping it out. Because there's a lot of moving parts, we had to kind of foresee where the different cracks might arise, and you can never be 100% positive at the outset. So, we learn very fast. We're paying attention to all the different components that might break down. We have a phenomenal crew of operations folks who are all coming in from the logistics world. Some of them worked at Penske 3PL. All of them are Lean Six Sigma certified. So we're attacking this very much from like a logistics and operations mindset and kind of like work backwards from there.
Gotcha. What percent of your customers do you think do that rush delivery?
Right now, we're seeing about 15 to 20% of orders taking the rush service when it's available. But because we only have a certain amount of slots available, those do fill up quickly.
So you're in New York. I guess New York is broken up into Manhattan and Brooklyn for you guys, and then DC. How did you pick DC as your next big city to go into?
It was the closest to New York. No, I'm kidding.
Well, it's probably true. Well, I guess Philadelphia would be closer, but.
For sure. No, I think what we wanted to do at the time was to show. I'd gotten a lot of questions about like, is this just a New York type business? Will this ever work outside of New York? And so what we wanted to show was that in a city where maybe more apartments had washers and dryers, but more people were relying on dry cleaning, could this also work? Could the business model work? And so DC, as you know, is very much a suit and tie town. There was an article, I think it was in the Washington Post from last summer, about how women were freezing in the workplace because all the offices had the AC cranked on high because all the men were wearing suits and ties. So we wanted to show, like New York, 85% of apartments don't have washers and dryers. Laundry is the big pain point here.
I didn't realize it was that high. It didn't have it. Jeez.
It's insane. So, and in DC, many more apartments will have washers and dryers, but more people are relying on dry cleaning and professional wear to work type outfits. So, could the business model work in that setting? And it certainly has. Average order value is about 1.5 times higher than it is in New York. The retention is just as good. People are placing orders, and they come to rely on Cleanly again for that closet care.
Gotcha. And I know you mentioned San Francisco be next. I guess San Francisco, it's kind of a little bit of both, right? I mean, you do have certainly the startup people that dress down, but you probably do still have the suit and tie people too, correct?
For sure. I think San Francisco is going to look probably a lot more similar to New York, where you have these like early adopter, the tech community, you have people that do work in finance, people that are wearing professional wear to work, a little bit more of a mix. And I think because you have such an early adopter tech community, people are more willing to try new services, without necessarily having to, hear that they're a well-known, trusted brand. They're much more risky when it comes to trying new services.
Oh yeah, San Francisco loves adopting new stuff. Talk to us about what was your customer acquisition strategy when you guys first launched in Manhattan? I know you told me on the intro or in the intro that you didn't do much paid marketing, if ever, if any. So must have been a lot of word of mouth and referrals, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, in the beginning, it was almost 100% word of mouth and in-app referrals. For the longest time, we were trying to push in-app referrals, and we couldn't figure out why people weren't using it. So we would ask people, how did you hear about Cleanly? They would say, my friend referred me, but we weren't seeing anybody use the referral codes, which is fine because it means that, we weren't spending money on the referral credits, but we wanted to figure out, like, why aren't people using this? We figured out probably it was a little bit too hidden within the navigation menu, and so we've done a lot to try to remind people, like, hey, use the referral credits. It's there. You're going to get free laundry out of it. So word of mouth and referrals have always been our strongest channels, and it hasn't been really until recently that we started to really pick up paid acquisition.
How did you incentivize? And I know you talked about a referral code, which probably got someone some free credits. Were you able to do something to get people to start referring friends, at a faster pace?
So once we up, I mean, this is obvious. Once we up the amount that we were willing to, because it starts backwards, right? We look at the lifetime value of different cohorts of customers, and we saw that people that are coming in from word of mouth and from in-app referrals had a much higher lifetime value. The retention was much better, and it makes sense because you were referred to us by a friend versus coming to us from like a daily deal. So once we did the LTV analysis and we said, okay, like the lifetime value is pretty high, we can afford to give even more, and we announced that we were going to give $30 for the referee and $30 for the referrer. Obviously, it's a huge spike, but it's also just about making people aware that it exists. So sometimes we'll do like really funny emails or push notifications. I remember we did one email just letting people know about like a special we were doing for referrals, and the email subject line was, "Do you have any friends?" ? And it had crazy high open rates, but people started taking to Twitter and screenshotting it and saying, Cleanly, what are you trying to say about me? And this is so insulting. But of course, the amount of referrals spiked on that day. And it goes through, sometimes it's just about awareness, like letting people know that this exists.
So I'm looking at your list of investors in your, I guess that's your seed round or A round, the one that was done back in 2015. And of course, you have Y-combinator in there. You have 500 startups. You have Funders Club, which seems to invest in a lot of Y-combinator companies. And then a few other angel investors, a few names I don't recognize. But the one that I definitely do is Joe Montana. Is that the football player?
Joe Montana. Remind me who he is? No, of course. Yeah, it's NFL Hall of Famer.
Yeah. So how did you guys get him in there?
He reached out to us, surprisingly. So, like I said before, we were one of the fastest growing companies in our batch in YC and Y-combinator, and word got around before demo day that we were growing really fast. Joe reached out to me. At first, it was a little bit surreal because I grew up idolizing him. I played Joe Montana 92 on Sega Genesis when I was a kid. But he asked a few questions, some really smart questions that other investors weren't asking us. Really kind of thinking down the road and forcing us to think outside of the box. And then he came in and said, he would love to invest. And, obviously we said we'd love to have him on board.
So I'm actually looking at his profile on Crunchbase, and I didn't realize he's actually a pretty active investor. He's made a bunch of investments.
He definitely has. And the team that he's assembled is really strong. One of the guys, Michael Ma, who's on his team, was a former Y-combinator founder. And so he just assembled a really strong, nimble team, and they sort of operate kind of like as a cross between VC and angel investors. And in addition to the check, they're able to give a lot of really good advice because the folks that he's surrounded himself with have a ton of experience in building startups and scaling startups and just all the different life cycles from that really early seed stage where you're trying to get product market fit to scaling a company, to hundreds of employees and multiple markets.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I mean, I always see this list every year of like the most successful pro, athletes post-career, what have they done? And I know he's been on the list. Shaquille O'Neal's always on the list, Magic Johnson, and a few others. So, some of these guys have certainly turned themselves into great investors. I mean, I know Shaq owns a bunch of restaurants and whatnot. So, pretty cool to talk to someone that actually got investment from Joe Montana. Yeah, definitely. I've idolized him for a long time as well, or when I was a kid. You told me this really cool story when we did the pre-call about getting into Y-combinator, but you guys had already kind of done beta testing in New York. So you actually stayed behind instead of going out to Silicon Valley. Take us through that.
Sure. So when we applied to Y-combinator, and a lot of people don't know this, we applied 3 times. 2 times we were rejected. It was only on the 3rd time when we applied, they flew us out there for the interview, and then they decided to fund us. But only after they announced that they were going to be funding us and that we were accepted into the program, we kind of had that heart-to-heart of, okay, well, what do we do now? You usually want companies to move out to Silicon Valley, to Mountain View, spend 3 months there, kind of intensely working together. Our business is in New York. Our families are in New York. We weren't a huge company at the time. We were only in private beta, but we were already kind of building a little bit of a buzz in New York. And Sam Altman, the president of Y-combinator, said, you may not get as much out of the program as everybody else, but your business is more important, and so you should stay in New York. But try to come out on Tuesdays for the Tuesday dinners where they bring a speaker to speak to the whole class, and everyone gets together for a community dinner. And they do the office hours with the Y-combinator partners on Tuesday. And it seemed a little crazy that we would just fly out on Tuesdays. And he told us, hey, the founders of Airbnb, when they went through Y-combinator, they too, all of their initial users were based in New York. They spent most of their time in New York, and they would fly in for the Tuesday dinners. So right away, I'm thinking, well, who the hell are those guys? Like, if they can do it, why can't I do it? This, should be pretty easy. For 3 months straight, every single week, I would fly out on Tuesdays to do the office hours with the partners, do the dinner, and then fly back on the red eye to New York. I think I must have lost like close to 20 pounds just from the stress of trying to build a company and flying and the red eye flights. But it was a good experience because it kind of really forced us to work at an incredible speed, an incredible pace that we never thought was possible. And the results showed. And like I said before, we were one of the fastest growing companies in our batch of 115 companies.
See, I'm the opposite. When I travel, I seem to gain weight because I'm always drinking beers and eating candy in airports and sitting around waiting, trying to keep myself busy.
It wasn't a healthy weight loss. Let's put it that way.
No, for sure. I'm sure you were glad when the 3 months was over and you kind of get back to a normal life.
For sure.
What have been the biggest challenges for you guys? I mean, you're a team now of 20 plus people. Are you still doing any active recruiting?
Oh, a ton. And the challenges have changed so much from day one. I remember our mentor, a guy by the name of Ron Gruszkowski, really smart and accomplished serial entrepreneur, who's also on our board. He told us, it definitely doesn't get easier. You just become kind of like more numb to it. But the challenges are always going to change, and the challenges seem to get kind of harder and harder, even though you think it should be the opposite as you start to become more successful as a company. So early on, the challenges were, how do we get users? How do we make sure we don't run out of cash? How are we going to push the product forward? Today, a lot of those challenges are, how do we recruit the best people? How do we make sure that we're building a culture that really defines who we want to be and who we want this company to be and what we want this company to look like for the next 10 years? How do we set up systems that allow us to scale to multiple markets? So the challenges are really different from where they were, a year or even 2 years ago, but they're certainly not easier.
Now, I mean, it sounds like this is the first time you probably had to do any recruiting. So when you're hiring people, for the warehouse or people that are part of that logistics chain, I mean, where do you go to find those people, and how do you know that they're the right fit for your culture?
We go everywhere. I mean, we post on AngelList, LinkedIn, Indeed, anywhere where we can post. We try to get referrals from people we know. We ask people that work here to refer their friends. We want to talk to everyone. And a lot of times it might be for positions that we don't know much about. And so we'll do a ton of research and talk to, even if we find someone that we really like, let's say on LinkedIn, but they're not looking to leave jobs, I'll still take a coffee meeting with them just if they're open to it, just so I can pick their brain and say, like, how would I find another person like you? How can I find a clone of you? What are the things I should be looking for? What are the questions I should be asking? And so you end up kind of getting all this knowledge about different fields and about, I'm certainly not an expert, but about what are the things you should be looking for and how do you test for this? And that's why it really pays to kind of have like a large network of people that want to help you.
Now, I'm assuming, you're a startup founder in growth mode, raise some money. You're probably working 50, 60 hours a week. What percentage of that do you think is actually spent on recruiting or taking those coffee,
easily a third,
yeah,
not more. Yeah.
It sounds like that's definitely kind of the number that people like to use, a third. Yeah, so you're probably spending 15, 20, maybe sometimes 25 hours a week recruiting and talking to potential team members, right?
For sure. And so many initial phone interviews. Yeah, I want to interview every single person. I don't know how long I'll be able to do that for, but I'd like to do it for, at least the first 100, if not 200 employees at Cleanly. So just imagine those are a lot of like initial phone calls that I might be taking with people that, will never end up having another conversation with them.
And what type of PR or marketing or just did you guys do before you went into DC that you're now going to do again before you go to San Francisco? I mean, I assume you must want to drum up some interest before you actually get people on the ground and set up a warehouse and all that, right?
For sure. So we actually have a wait list in a lot of the cities that we want to open up. People have heard about us. We have these different SEO pages, for the last 2 years that have been running in multiple markets that have driven quite a bit of sign-ups to our wait list. But we'll do just all the basics, like showing up with street teams, doing out-of-home marketing. We use the DC Metro to kind of help get brand awareness up. We advertise on bike share, the different bike share programs that they have there, reaching out to influencers in the area, getting them to try the service initially before we do like the big push. And also PR, getting different journalists in the market to cover us. But it needs to be an intense push because what we're trying to do is build that kind of critical mass initially where we get to the point where our drivers are busy with enough orders. We don't want, drivers sitting around and not getting any orders. Because we know referrals work really well for us, we need an initial seed of users that will start referring their friends. So those first 3 months are really important to kind of make that big push and build that critical mass.
There's got to be a certain, and this is a long shot, and if you don't answer it, I totally understand why. But I mean, when you go into a new city, I mean, you must know going into it, what your fixed costs are going to be in terms of marketing and the warehouse and everything else. So there must be a magic number that you have to get to kind of get to break even, right?
For sure.
How long does it typically take you, or how long do you anticipate it would take you guys to get to that number in new cities?
It should not take more than 6 months.
Okay. That sounds pretty reasonable. I mean, I was expecting you to say even a year or two, but 6 months sounds pretty good, pretty aggressive.
The initial costs don't have to be high. I mean, we don't need to take a 10,000 square foot warehouse on day one. We don't need to staff up with a whole bunch of warehouse employees. Those things can scale up, and so what you really, like you said, you want to keep your fixed costs minimal while still having enough of a presence and being able to feed those initial customers. But there's a certain curve, and you're not going to have 1,000 orders on day one. It'll start slowly. You might be doing 25, then 50, then 100, then 200. And so we know how to scale that up and how to do it appropriately, but you really want to keep those fixed costs low when you open up a new market, especially when you're a startup in our stage.
Do you think at any point in some of the more mature markets that you're in, after you have a large client base, you would bring in the washing in-house, or do you think it will always work better to outsource that aspect?
I get asked that question all the time from journalists, from investors. We never say never. That being said, we're confident that there's enough existing infrastructure in all of the major markets that we'd want to go to be able to leverage that existing infrastructure. At some point in the future, I'm sure there's going to be conversations of, we've already saturated all the markets we could be in. Growth might slow, at year 7 or year 10. And we might say, how do we squeeze a few extra percentage points out of on the margins? Well, let's invest in the fixed expense of doing our own washing, and the margins will be that much better.
Right.
There may come a point in time down the line where we'll have those conversations. For right now, we think there's enough existing infrastructure that we can scale quickly and still be asset light.
Now, I assume the factors, or some of the I guess factors is a good word, deciding where you want to go. Because I mean, if I'm on your website right now and it says laundry day done, and then type in your zip code, place an order online, and I do that for a Boston zip code, and it comes back and says, we're not in your market yet, but we can add you to the wait list. So you guys have probably been doing that for a while. So you probably have, like you said earlier, probably a ton of pent up demand from cities around the country. But are there any cities where you guys have a lot of demand that you'll probably never go into because there isn't that population density?
I mean, there probably are, but I think it's safe to say that the top 15 to 20 markets, sometimes we like to refer to them as like the NFL cities.
Right.
They're all in play. Suburbs are going to be tougher just because of the density aspect, but there's no reason why this can't be a very large business, even just being in those major metro areas.
So maybe 3 years out, you plan on being in all those NFL cities?
If we continue at the pace we are, there's no reason why we shouldn't.
Right. Okay. Do you think you'll have to raise more capital?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of this is, do you want to continue to grow at the pace you're growing, or is there a case to be made to grow even faster with outside capital? And so those are the trade-offs that as founders we have to make. Do we want to take the extra dilution? Do we think the business is at a stage where it's healthy to grow at a faster pace? And so we need to be really mindful with the business model, with the financial model, and just where we think we are kind of in the life cycle of the business. It's not, we don't take raising outside capital lightly. It's not just, okay, let's raise money for the sake of it. If we don't know exactly how we're going to use it and how it's going to give us an ROI, it's actually very expensive capital to take given the dilution.
So you've been working with investors now for about 2 years. Would you say that the majority of your investors are, thinking or saying, let's grow faster or let's slow down? I assume they want to grow faster, right? I mean, they want to be in all those cities.
Sure, and angel investors will have different incentives than VCs. I think we've been really fortunate and lucky that all of our investors have been really aligned with us as founders of how we want to run the company and how fast we want to grow it and what's an appropriate pace and where we should be spending our resources. That may not be the case with every company. That's been our experience, and I said maybe we're just really fortunate and lucky with the people that we brought on board.
And how does pricing work for you guys? Is it per item, per pound?
Wash and fold laundry is per pound. That's standard in the industry. And then dry cleaning and laundered shirts, that's per item.
Okay. And does it vary city to city? I mean, I would think that New York is, kind of the most expensive city out there based on just real estate prices. So
no, it's
New York?
It's so crazy. New York will likely be, for the foreseeable future, the cheapest out of all the markets because there's so much competition here. There's over 3,500 local mom and pop cleaners.
Wow.
If you have an idea, and that's driven the price down, and what the consumer is willing to pay. So we're at $1.50 per pound for laundry in New York, and that's all in. There's no extra fees for adding bleach or adding fabric softener, separating your whites and colors. Like we believe that should just be an all-in price. And we still get customers who will say, I love the service, still feel like it's a little expensive. Whereas in DC, we're close to $2 per pound, and people are fine paying it. No one complains about price in Washington DC.
I never would have guessed that. I guess in New York, I mean, all their money's going to rent. They don't have much money left over. But I mean, not only are they, this is a time saver, right? I mean, certainly the amount of time that you're saving the average person, if they don't have a washer and dryer in their unit and they have to go, trek down the stairs and down the street to the laundromat and do their laundry. I mean, have you guys tried to figure out how much time you're saving the average person on a weekly or monthly basis?
Yeah, we say, a couple hours a week easily,
right?
So that could translate into 8 to 10 hours a month. I think the more important thing is just the de-stress that it causes. And until you really use it, you don't really get the sense of like how much stress it causes. It's the folding, just the fact that everything comes back cleaned exactly how you wanted it cleaned. The whites are separated from the colors. The underwear is separated from the rest of the stuff. All the socks are matched. Everything's folded, and it comes neatly packed, in Saran wrap. And you're literally just taking that and putting it in your dresser, and it goes from this, this chore that all of us have to do, and many of us don't like to do, to something that you just kind of like cross off your list and get back to doing whatever else you want to do. Spend time with your family, pick up a new hobby, whatever it is. We're not changing the world. We get that. I think we're really humbled by where we fit into people's lives. But if we can give them just a couple hours extra a week and take that stress off of them, then we did our job.
So when Uber first started, they were really just black car service, and I remember those early days. And then they came out with Uberacts, which was, get picked up by anybody. It could be your neighbor, it could be the college kid, whoever. Do you guys think you'll ever morph part of your business into that model as well, where you have the core business where it's going through your warehouses and through the commercial cleaners or washers, and then you have the other part of the business where you could get laundry done by anybody in your local area?
So I don't know that it'll look and feel exactly the way that you said it, but I think there's a lot of merit to thinking about how to expand the product so that you're reaching different segments of the market for people that might be more price sensitive. And we certainly have a few things that we're working on that we'll be excited to roll out soon.
Now, speaking as a founder to other founders that are listening to this, what advice would you give them? Like what mistakes have you made over the last few years? What lessons have you learned? What would you do differently? I'm a founder myself, looking to scale my new business. And this one of the reasons I do this podcast is I love talking to people like yourself that are on that journey too, and willing to share stuff with us. So what would you tell another founder about, just anything, anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, there's so much. I think probably the most important is just perseverance and getting really tough skin. I mean, you're going to hear no so many times. You're going to hear no from the market. You're going to hear no from journalists. You're going to hear no from investors if you decide to go that route of raising funding. And you need to get really, really tough skin. And if you believe in your mission, you really believe in what you're trying to do, and that cause is worthy, and just really keep at it and have that perseverance, because this is a marathon. And even though, Y-Combinator is like a very compressed experience where, it feels like you're sprinting at an insane pace, one of the things they tell you at the culmination is like, okay, we did this on purpose because we have a certain model that we're trying to fit with, with a demo day and get you in a shape where you look exciting for investors. But really the key to longevity is to treat this like a marathon, and to not burn out, because there's so many ways to die as a young business, and you certainly can probably talk about it a lot. But one of the ways is just the founders quitting or giving up. And so I think I've seen way too many instances where businesses could have turned out to be really interesting businesses, or maybe they would have morphed or evolved a little bit had the founder just kept on going. So I think that's a really big piece of advice that I would hope to pass on.
Love it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing that. Dude, that's pretty much all I got for you. Anything we skipped over, anything that you wanted to mention about the company or where to find you guys on social media?
Yeah, for sure. So we're cleanly.com, at cleanly on Twitter and Instagram. If your listeners use the code StartupSense and they're in New York or DC or hopefully soon San Francisco, again, the code is StartupSense. They'll get $20 off their first order.
Awesome.
So I encourage everyone to download the app.
I certainly will. Thank you for that. Well, thank you so much, Tom. Wish you guys the best. Sounds like you guys are off to a great start here. I'm sure it'll continue, and look forward to staying in touch with you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Got it, man. Talk to you soon, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye.